You clicked on this video because the title itself pulled you in. It whispered a promise of drama, of secrets, of love that wasn't supposed to happen but somehow did, of a story where one decision changed everything. And right now, before I even let the first scene unfold, let me speak directly to you, because I know why you're here. You're not just looking for another story. You're looking for the answer to that powerful question that brought you here. How can a simple tutor, someone dismissed as ordinary, end up being the woman who owns his forever? You want to know the hidden twists, the moments of vulnerability, the shocking choices that tie two lives together forever when they were never meant to even meet. And I promise you, if you stay with me until the end, you're going to walk away not only with the full answer but with a story so gripping that you'll remember it long after this video ends. That's my promise to you right now. Don't click away, because every single second from here on matters. Think about it. Every person you've ever met had a moment where they could either be forgotten or remembered forever. For this young woman, her fate was to simply walk into a stranger's house as a tutor, nothing more, nothing less. She thought she was there just to help, to teach, to earn a paycheck. But she had no idea that stepping into that room was like stepping into the center of a storm that would change not only her life but also his. A man who was supposed to be untouchable, too far above her reach, a man the world would say she had no right to claim. But you know what? Life doesn't care about the rules society makes, and love doesn't read the script that others write. And tonight, you're going to see how a simple twist of fate can flip an entire future upside down. Now, before we go into the story itself, let me anchor you into the atmosphere. Picture this. A quiet evening in a mansion on the edge of the city. The streets outside buzz with life cars passing, neon lights flickering, people living their everyday routine. But inside this mansion, silence rules. Thick curtains swallow the sunlight, expensive chandeliers hang above like silent witnesses, and the air itself feels heavier, like the house is holding on to 100 secrets it doesn't want the world to know. This is the place where she first walked in, clutching her bag of notes, her worn-out textbooks, and her carefully rehearsed lines of polite introductions. To her, it was just a job. To him, it was just another inconvenience arranged by his overbearing family. Neither of them knew they were about to step into each other's destiny. But let me pause here and talk to you directly, because this is where the master move comes in. You might think you know where this is going. Poor tutor, rich man, predictable love story. Right, wrong. This isn't one of those stories that you can guess in the first few minutes. This is the story where every expectation is flipped on its head, where every smile hides a scar, where every decision has a consequence that will come back harder than anyone could imagine. And the only way you'll truly see how deep this story runs is if you stick around until the very last second, because I am going to give you the full answer, the real reason why she was just a tutor, but now she's his forever. So, don't blink, don't scroll away. Stay with me. The girl's name is Emily. She's 24, fresh out of graduate school. The kind of woman who doesn't stand out in a crowd but has something unshakable in her eyes. If you look closely enough, a quiet determination, a hint of resilience, like life has already tested her in ways she doesn't talk about. She doesn't wear designer clothes, doesn't drive a flashy car, doesn't have a last name that opens doors for her. She is, in the eyes of the world, ordinary. And yet, ordinary people are often the ones who hide extraordinary stories, aren't they? That's why you're still here, because deep down you know the people who appear the smallest on the outside are the ones carrying the most inside. Emily is no exception. And then there's him, Alexander Knight. Yes, even the name feels heavy, doesn't it? Alexander isn't just rich, he's untouchable. The kind of man whose life has been planned since birth. Born into old money, raised in privilege, trained in discipline, shielded from failure. To the world, he's the perfect heir, brilliant, polished, every move calculated. To his family, he's the son who cannot afford to falter. But underneath that steel exterior is a man who feels trapped, who knows that every handshake, every smile, every carefully chosen word is nothing more than a mask. He doesn't let people close, he doesn't trust easily, and he definitely doesn't believe in accidents. Until her. Now let's draw the first thread of tension. You and I both know stories don't just happen. Something has to trigger them, something has to light the match. And for Emily, the match was lit the very moment she opened that grand wooden door and stepped into the mansion. Imagine her walking through the foyer, eyes darting nervously over the marble floors and the gold-framed paintings on the wall. She feels out of place, like she doesn't belong, like she's trespassing in a world that was never meant for her. But she straightens her back, reminds herself she's here for work, and follows the butler into the study. She doesn't know that behind that desk, Alexander is already waiting, already annoyed, already determined to make this session as short as possible. She doesn't know that in just a few moments, the two of them will look at each other for the first time and everything will change. And here's where I need you to lean in a little closer. Because this is the part where you, the viewer, become part of the story. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere? Like you were standing in a room where every wall screamed that you weren't enough, but you still held your ground anyway? If you have, then you already understand Emily. And if you've ever felt the weight of expectations crushing your every move, forcing you to perform a version of yourself that doesn't even feel real anymore, then you already understand Alexander. That's why this story matters. Because at its heart, this isn't just about a tutor and her student. It's about what happens when two people carrying invisible battles collide, and in that collision they find something the world told them they couldn't have. But don't get too comfortable, because this is where things start to twist. Just as Emily takes her seat and nervously lays out her notes, Alexander looks at her with a sharpness that makes her hands tremble. He doesn't want her there. He doesn't need her there. At least, that's what he tells himself. But his eyes betray something else, a flicker of curiosity, a trace of recognition. Like some part of him knows this woman is about to unravel his carefully built walls. And just when Emily thinks this is going to be another ordinary tutoring session, he throws a challenge at her, one that makes her question if she even deserves to sit in front of him. She doesn't know it yet, but this moment is the first step into a future she never imagined. And that's where I'm going to leave you, because if you think this first encounter is going to go smoothly, you're wrong. The clash between Emily and Alexander is not just about books and lessons, it's about pride, about hidden wounds, about secrets that neither of them wants to admit. And by the end of this session, something will happen that will shake both of them to the core. You don't want to miss it. You came here looking for the answer, and I promise you it's coming. But first, you have to see how the fire starts. Emily sat across from Alexander with her notes spread neatly on the desk, but her hands betrayed her nerves as they trembled slightly. She told herself it was just another student, another assignment, nothing more than what she had trained herself to do. Yet the intensity of his stare made it feel like something else entirely. Alexander didn't speak right away. He studied her as if she were a puzzle, a disruption in his carefully ordered life. And in that silence, Emily felt every second stretch long enough to make her throat dry. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and spoke with a tone that was casual on the surface but sharpened with arrogance underneath. He told her he didn't need her help, that he had been forced into this arrangement by his father. And if she thought she was going to walk in here and teach him anything, she was mistaken. His words stung, but Emily didn't flinch. She had heard worse in her life, words that cut deeper than anything Alexander Knight could throw at her. And she silently vowed that no amount of intimidation would push her out the door tonight. That vow was rooted in her past, though she never voiced it aloud. Emily had grown up in a home where money was always scarce and choices were even scarcer. Her mother had worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and Emily had taken on tutoring since she was 15 to help with groceries and rent. Every time someone doubted her, every time someone mocked her for dreaming too big, she stored it away like fuel, determined to prove them wrong. That's why she had said yes to this job in the first place, even though the Knight family name was whispered about in the city like it belonged to royalty. She told herself it didn't matter how grand their house was or how untouchable their reputation seemed. She would walk in, do her work, and walk out again with her dignity intact. She didn't know yet that Alexander's world wasn't as solid as it looked, and stepping into it meant stepping into cracks she couldn't yet see. On the other side, Alexander was dealing with a different kind of storm. His father, Richard Knight, was a man who believed discipline was the answer to everything. Richard had built his empire from generations of wealth, but unlike his ancestors who had indulged in comfort, Richard had sharpened the family legacy into something ruthless. He demanded perfection, and Alexander had been his project since birth. Every success was expected, every failure punished with icy silence, every choice scrutinized until Alexander felt less like a son and more like an heir being trained to perform. The tutoring sessions were not about academics, they were about control. His father believed that having Emily there would keep him focused, grounded, and away from distractions. To Alexander, she was just another chain, another reminder that he couldn't even decide who was allowed into his own home. And yet, as much as he told himself to dismiss her, something about Emily's quiet strength gnawed at him. The tension between them grew sharper with every session. Emily prepared diligently, bringing notes, explanations, and encouragement, while Alexander pushed back with dismissive remarks and deliberate challenges. He would purposely solve problems incorrectly just to test if she noticed, and when she did, he would smirk as though amused that she dared correct him. But underneath the banter was something neither of them admitted on awareness, that the sessions were no longer just about books. Sometimes Alexander found himself distracted by the way Emily's eyes lit up when she explained something she was passionate about. Sometimes Emily caught herself noticing the way Alexander's voice softened when he forgot to be defensive. It was dangerous, unspoken, but undeniable. While their own silent war unfolded in the study, forces outside were already circling, building layers of conflict neither of them expected. Among the household staff, whispers had begun about the tutor. Some dismissed her as just another temporary visitor, but others noticed the way Alexander seemed different when she was around, less cold, more alive. The butler, Mr. Harris, kept his observations to himself, but his watchful eyes missed nothing. Meanwhile, Richard Knight had his own reasons for hiring Emily beyond what he revealed. He had dug into her background, discovered her modest upbringing, her struggles, her clean reputation. To him, she was the perfect test, a reminder to Alexander that no matter how much he wanted freedom, his life was still under surveillance. Emily didn't know she was being studied not just by a student but by his powerful father as well. Outside the mansion, Emily's own life carried a different set of pressures. She still lived in a small apartment with thin walls and neighbors who fought loudly at night. Bills piled up no matter how many hours she worked, and her mother's health was declining, forcing Emily to balance responsibility with ambition. Sometimes, after leaving the mansion late at night, she would walk home instead of taking the bus, just to clear her head. She would replay the tutoring sessions in her mind, trying to figure out why Alexander's words lingered long after she left. She told herself it was frustration, irritation, maybe even pity, but deep down she knew it was something more complicated. He wasn't just another spoiled heir, there was a loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. Then came the first real crack in Alexander's armor. One evening, during a particularly tense session, his phone rang. Emily had never seen him flustered before, but when he glanced at the screen and froze, she caught a glimpse of vulnerability. He excused himself, but not before she noticed his hands tremble. When he returned, his usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet anger that made the air heavy. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask, but from that night onward, Emily couldn't stop wondering what could shake a man like Alexander Knight. That question burrowed into her, deepening the mystery, keeping her awake at night. But Alexander wasn't the only one with secrets. Emily carried her own burden, something she had worked hard to keep hidden. Her father had left years ago, vanishing without explanation, and though she pretended she didn't care, the absence haunted her. She had built her life around proving that she didn't need anyone to save her. But sometimes in the quiet hours, the ache returned. She never planned to share that with anyone, least of all a man like Alexander. But fate has a way of pulling hidden truths into the light when you least expect it. The tension reached another level when Alexander's appeared. Yes, he was engaged in an arrangement made by his family long before Emily ever stepped into the mansion. Her name was Victoria, a woman who carried herself like she already owned the Knight fortune. Beautiful, polished, and calculating, she saw Emily as a threat the moment their paths crossed. Victoria didn't believe Alexander would ever betray their arrangement, but she wasn't naive. She noticed the way his eyes flickered when Emily was mentioned, and that was enough to set her on edge. From then on, Emily's presence wasn't just about tutoring anymore, it was about survival in a game she didn't even know she was playing. And this is where the story takes its sharp turn, because what started as a simple job was now entangled with family politics, hidden vulnerabilities, and unspoken desires. Emily was walking into battles she didn't choose, caught between a man who pushed her away yet pulled her closer with every passing day, a father who was testing her without her knowledge, and a who saw her as an enemy. Every session, every glance, every word became a thread pulling her deeper into the Knight family's labyrinth. And as much as she wanted to stay detached, to just focus on her work, the truth was undeniable. Something had already changed between her and Alexander, something that could not be undone. The real question, the one that keeps you watching, is not whether Emily will survive in this world, but how. Because the moment she walked into that mansion, she was no longer just a tutor. She was part of something much larger, a story where secrets are weapons, love is forbidden, and choices have consequences that ripple far beyond what anyone can control. And just when Emily thought she had adjusted to the strange balance of her new life, one night, she stumbled upon something inside the mansion that she was never meant to see, and that discovery would change everything. Emily had grown accustomed to the rhythm of her evenings at the Knight mansion, each session beginning with tension and ending with her walking home under the dim glow of city lights. She thought she had begun to understand Alexander, his moods, his sharp edges, and the rare moments when his guard slipped. But one night, when she stayed a little longer than usual to finish reviewing a section of material, she found herself wandering through the hall on her way out and passing a door that stood slightly ajar. Something about the faint light inside pulled her attention, and though she knew she shouldn't look, curiosity overpowered caution. Emily pushed the door open gently, and what she saw made her heart race. It wasn't just a study or another lavishly decorated room, it was a private office filled with files, letters, and photographs, pinned to a board in chaotic patterns like pieces of a puzzle being tracked by someone who couldn't let go of the truth. In the center of it all was Alexander's face, circled in red ink, with a single phrase scrawled underneath. Not ready, not safe. She froze, her mind racing with possibilities. Who had written this? Was Alexander keeping track of his enemies, or was someone else watching him within his own home? Before she could take a step closer, a shadow moved behind her and she heard a voice, calm but cold. It was Richard Knight, his presence filling the room like an iron cage. He didn't raise his voice, but his words struck like a threat carefully hidden behind civility. He told her she had seen too much, that not every room in this house was meant for her eyes, and that curiosity was a dangerous habit. Emily tried to steady her voice as she apologized and explained she had simply lost her way. But deep down she knew this wasn't a mistake she could walk away from so easily. Richard's eyes lingered on her, weighing, measuring, before he finally dismissed her with a warning that echoed in her ears long after she left. If you going to stay in this house, learn where you belong. From that night, everything shifted. Emily began noticing things she had missed before: the hushed phone calls Richard took late at night, the locked rooms that even the staff avoided, the subtle way guards seemed to monitor not just the mansion's exterior but also its inhabitants. It wasn't just wealth that lived in this house, it was power tightly wrapped in secrecy, and Alexander, for all his arrogance, seemed to be at the center of it. She wanted to ask him about the office, about the words written under his photograph, but the moment she tried, he shut her down with a sharpness that felt more like fear than anger. For the first time, Emily wondered if Alexander was as free as he pretended to be, or if he, too, was a prisoner in his father's empire. As the days passed, the subplot with Victoria deepened. She had always viewed Emily as an annoyance, but now, with whispers reaching her about Emily being seen in parts of the mansion that weren't meant for her, Victoria grew bolder. She confronted Emily one evening outside the gates, her polished voice dripping with condescension as she warned her to stay in her lane. Victoria wasn't subtle. She hinted that the Knight family wasn't just powerful socially but dangerous in ways Emily couldn't imagine. She told Emily that she would be crushed if she kept playing a game she wasn't invited to. But instead of scaring her away, Victoria's words only fanned the fire inside Emily. She had spent her whole life being told what she couldn't do, where she didn't belong, and each time she had chosen to stand taller. This would be no different, even if her opponent was a woman with wealth, status, and a claim on Alexander's future. Meanwhile, Alexander himself was unraveling in ways Emily had never seen. He began to show up late to sessions, his eyes shadowed, his patience thinner, as if something outside their lessons was consuming him. One night, when he snapped at her for pressing too hard on a problem, she finally pushed back, telling him that hiding behind anger wouldn't fix whatever was haunting him. For the first time, his composure cracked. He admitted, in fragments, that his life wasn't his own, that everything around him was staged, controlled, and monitored. He didn't give details, but he spoke with a rawness that told her this wasn't just about strict parenting, it was something deeper, darker, and dangerous. And in that moment, Emily realized she was no longer just his tutor. She was becoming his confidant, someone he could show pieces of himself he had hidden from everyone else. The unexpected twist came days later, when Emily returned home to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. It bore no name, no return address, just her own written in a hurried scrawl. Inside was a single photograph of her walking out of the Knight mansion, followed by a note in jagged handwriting. "Stay away, or you'll regret it." Her stomach knotted as she realized someone was watching her, tracking her movements, and this wasn't just about tutoring anymore. She didn't know whether it was Victoria, Richard, or some unknown force lurking in the shadows of the Knight family's empire, but the message was clear: she was in danger. Yet, instead of running, Emily felt an unexpected surge of resolve. Someone wanted her gone, which meant she was closer to the truth than she realized. The stakes had risen beyond what she ever imagined. What began as a simple job was now tangled in secrets, warnings, and threats, and every path forward seemed more dangerous than the last. Emily didn't know who to trust, not even Alexander, whose silence left her torn between sympathy and suspicion. But she couldn't walk away. Something about this family, something about him had already tied her fate to theirs. She was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant stepping deeper into a world that might swallow her whole. And just when she thought she could predict how far this would go, the mansion itself delivered the next shock. One night, as she entered the study for another session, the sound of raised voices echoed through the halls. Alexander and Richard were arguing, truly arguing, a way that shook the walls of the house. Their words were muffled, but the fury was unmistakable. And then, suddenly, a door slammed, and Alexander stormed into the study with eyes burning, his mask of control shattered. He looked at Emily with an intensity that rooted her to the spot, and in a voice that trembled with both rage and desperation, he told her the words that would change everything. "You shouldn't have come here tonight. It's not safe for you anymore." And with that, the story's direction twisted again, leaving Emily staring at him, torn between fear and the gnawing certainty that she was already too deep to ever turn back. Alexander's warning lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear, and Emily felt her pulse thunder in her ears as she tried to read the urgency in his expression. He wasn't teasing this time, wasn't playing the arrogant air trying to push her away. He was deadly serious, and for the first time she understood that whatever danger was closing in on him now was also closing in on her. She wanted to demand answers, to know why he kept telling her to leave when he was the one who had started to let her glimpse behind the mask. But before she could speak, the heavy sound of footsteps filled the corridor outside the study. Richard Knight entered, his presence icy and commanding, and in his eyes Emily could see a storm brewing that threatened to consume everything around him. He looked at his son with cold fury, then at her with measured disdain, and told them both the charade was over. Richard revealed what had been hidden in the shadows all along, that Alexander was never just the heir to a fortune, but the centerpiece of a power struggle far larger than their family name. Every move Alexander made was being watched, not only by his father but by rivals who wanted control of the empire the knights had built. Richard admitted he had brought Emily into the house, not just as a tutor, but as a test, a distraction, and a way to measure his son's loyalty. What Richard hadn't expected was that Alexander would break the rules, that he would let his guard down and allow someone from the outside into the cage he had carefully constructed around him. Emily realized with a chill that the strange office she had stumbled upon, the warnings she had received, and the growing hostility from Victoria were all pieces of the same web, a web designed to trap Alexander into submission. For Alexander, the revelation snapped something deep inside. For years he had played the role his father demanded, had followed the script laid out for him, but in that moment he refused to bend any longer. He turned to Richard and declared with a force that shook the room that he would no longer be a pawn in his father's empire, and that no amount of threats or tests could erase the fact that his life was his own. Emily stood stunned as she realized the weight of his defiance. This wasn't just rebellion against a strict father. This was a declaration of war against a legacy built on control. And Richard, for all his intimidation, could do nothing to mask the crack in his power as his son stood before him unshaken for the first time. But the climax didn't come with words alone. That same night, as if the universe had been waiting for the moment to fracture, the mansion's security was breached. The enemies Richard had feared, business rivals long kept at bay by power and wealth, had found their opening. The house erupted in chaos, guards rushing, alarms blaring, shadows moving in the dark halls. Emily and Alexander found themselves caught in the storm, running through corridors once familiar but now twisted into a labyrinth of danger. For Emily, it was surreal to have walked into this house as a tutor and now be fleeing through it as if she were part of its bloodline, hunted for secrets she never meant to uncover. In the midst of the chaos, Victoria appeared, her polished facade shattered by fear. For a moment it seemed she might side with Alexander, but when the chance came, she revealed her true hand. She had been working with the rivals all along, feeding them information in hopes of securing her own position of power once Richard fell. Her jealousy of Emily had only heightened her betrayal, making her desperate to prove she could be more useful than a mere outsider who had captured Alexander's attention. The revelation struck Alexander like a blade, but instead of breaking him, it only hardened his resolve. He saw clearly now that every chain around him, family, engagement, legacy, was designed to strip him of choice, and he refused to be bound any longer. The climax reached its breaking point when Alexander and Emily found themselves cornered in the study, the same room where their uneasy relationship had begun. The intruders closed in. Richard barked orders that carried no weight anymore. And for a moment Emily thought it might all end there. But Alexander, with a clarity that came only from standing on the edge, made his choice. He took Emily's hand, looked his father in the eye, and declared that whatever came next, he would face it not as the heir Richard had built, but as his own man, and that Emily was not leaving his side. It was a moment of defiance, of love, and of freedom, one that silenced even the chaos raging outside for the briefest second. With the help of loyal staff who had long grown weary of Richard's rule, Alexander and Emily managed to escape the mansion that night. The empire Richard had built began to crumble under the weight of betrayal and attack, and for once Alexander did not look back. The world outside was uncertain, and Emily knew her life would never return to the quiet simplicity it once held. But as they stood together in the cool night air, hands still clasped, she realized that the question which had haunted her from the beginning had been answered. She wasn't just a tutor anymore. She wasn't an outsider looking in. She was the woman who had stood beside Alexander in the fire. The one who had seen him stripped of his masks, and the one he had chosen to hold on to when everything else fell away. The resolution came not with the restoration of wealth or power, but with the quiet understanding that they were free from expectations, free from control, and free to build a future on their own terms. Emily still carried her struggles, her mother's illness, her uncertain career, but now she faced them with someone who understood what it meant to carry invisible burdens. Alexander no longer bore the weight of being the perfect heir, but the responsibility of choosing his own path. And for the first time in his life, he welcomed it. And just when it seemed the story had given up all its secrets, the final twist revealed itself. Weeks later, as Emily unpacked boxes in the modest apartment they now shared, she found an envelope tucked into her belongings, one she had never placed there. Inside was a single photograph and image of her father, the man who had vanished from her life years ago, standing beside Richard Knight in a meeting long before she had ever stepped foot in the mansion. Scrawled on the back were words that sent a chill through her veins. "The past ice and tea finished with you yet." In that moment Emily understood that the story was far from over, that the threads tying her to Alexander and the Knights ran deeper than she ever imagined. But as she looked at Alexander, who wrapped his arm around her shoulders and whispered that they would face whatever came next together, she felt a certainty stronger than fear. She had come into his life as just the tutor, but now, no matter what secrets the future uncovered, she was his forever. And that, dear listener, is the story you came here searching for. A story about power, betrayal, freedom, and love that defied every chain. A story that reminds you that sometimes the roles we were given are not the roles we must keep, and that in the unlikeliest of places we may find the person who changes everything. You wanted the answer, and now you have it. She was just the tutor, but now, she's his forever.